Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be looking at one of the most popular and influential works of history in recent decades,
Mm-hmm.
Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond.
The big one.
And we're going to be trying to unpack some of his major arguments and some of the evidence that he uses and look at the implications of his work as well.
And this book is fascinating because it attempts to answer such a huge question.
Right.
Why is it that some societies throughout history have developed so much wealth and power and technology
Right.
while others have not?
Yeah, and I think it's such a great starting point for thinking about global inequality.
Yeah.
And we're not trying to praise or condemn any particular society here,
Mhm.
but really just trying to look at the historical patterns
Eh,
that led to the world as we know it today.
Yeah, and Diamond actually begins his whole exploration with this really simple question that was posed to him
Okay.
by a New Guinean politician named Yali
Okay.
back in 1972.
All right, so take us there.
So picture this. You're on a beach in New Guinea.
Okay.
It's 1972, and Yali, a local politician, asks Diamond this very pointed question.
Oh, wow.
He says, "Why is it that you white people have so much cargo?"
Cargo.
Yeah, by cargo, he meant like material goods.
Got it.
And we New Guineans have so little.
So he's talking about this disparity in wealth and material possessions?
Exactly. And this simple question launches Diamond on a quest to understand these deeper historical forces.
So he doesn't just go for the easy answer, right?
Not at all.
Like some people might say, oh, certain societies are just inherently
Or advanced.
more advanced or intelligent or whatever.
But Diamond actually argues the opposite.
Okay.
He says that New Guineans are probably more intelligent on average than Westerners.
Oh, wow. So how does he back that up?
He points to the incredibly challenging environment they live in.
Okay.
They've had to develop really sophisticated skills and knowledge just to survive.
So it's like they're constantly being tested by their surroundings.
Exactly. Their intelligence is honed by necessity.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, it challenges our assumptions about what intelligence even means.
Totally. And so if it's not about inherent intelligence, then what is it? What are the real factors that explain these differences in development?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And Diamond goes on to explore several key factors that he calls ultimate causes.
Ultimate causes as opposed to
Right.
proximate causes.
Okay, so what's the difference there?
Well, proximate causes are like those immediate triggers
Okay.
of an event, while ultimate causes are those deeper historical factors
Okay, that makes sense.
that set the stage.
So let's dive into one of those proximate causes that Diamond uses to illustrate his point, and it's a pretty dramatic story.
Oh yeah, the conquest of the Inca Empire by Pizarro,
Exactly.
a tiny band of Spanish conquistadors taking down a vast empire.
It seems almost impossible, right?
It's mind-boggling. So how did they do it?
Well, Diamond points to a few key proximate factors, like the Spaniards had guns,
Oh yeah, steel swords and horses.
right? Things that the Incas had never seen before.
Imagine the shock and awe.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a technological advantage.
And on top of that, they brought with them diseases like smallpox,
Right.
which absolutely devastated the Inca population.
It's like an invisible weapon.
It really was. And it's important to remember that these diseases had a devastating impact across the Americas.
So it wasn't just limited to the Inca Empire.
Not at all. It was a widespread phenomenon.
So we've got guns, germs, and steel, but Diamond argues that we need to dig deeper to understand the root causes.
Right, we need to understand why the Spaniards had these advantages in the first place.
And that brings us to one of his most crucial arguments, which is the importance of...
Food production.
Exactly. He argues that geography played a huge role in shaping which societies were able to develop agriculture and how that agriculture then led to other advancements.
It makes sense when you think about it. Societies that could reliably produce food had more time and resources to devote to other things.
Right, like developing technologies or building complex social structures.
Right.
Diamond uses this really interesting story to illustrate his point, the story of the Moriori and the Maori.
Oh yeah, two groups with shared ancestry, but they ended up with dramatically different societies.
Because of their environment, right?
Exactly. The Moriori lived on these small, resource-poor islands,
Okay.
and they remained hunter-gatherers. But the Maori settled in New Zealand, which had more fertile land and resources.
So they were able to develop agriculture.
And from there, they developed more complex social structures, even a warrior culture.
So it's a really clear example of how environment can shape the trajectory of a society.
It really is.
And it gets even more fascinating when you look at the specific plants and animals that were available for domestication.
Right. Diamond points out that only 14 large mammal species were domesticated before modern times, and every single one of them was native to Eurasia.
So that's things like sheep, oxen, horses.
Exactly. Animals that were relatively docile and easy to work with.
And you're saying that this had a huge impact on the development of Eurasian societies.
Absolutely. Not only did these animals provide food,
Right.
but they also provided other benefits like fertilizer transportation and even unintentionally exposure to diseases.
Okay, wait. So how did domesticated animals lead to disease?
Because Eurasians had been living in close proximity to these animals for thousands of years.
Okay.
They'd been exposed to a whole bunch of germs and developed some immunity.
Okay.
But when these germs reached populations in the Americas and Australia who had no prior exposure,
Right.
the results were catastrophic.
It's kind of a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
Domesticated animals helped Eurasian societies thrive, but they also inadvertently contributed to the spread of deadly diseases.
Exactly. It's a stark reminder of how interconnected human history really is.
It really is. And it makes you wonder. I mean, imagine you're an early farmer in a place like New Guinea or the eastern United States.
Yeah.
You don't have these big, helpful animals like oxen or horses.
Right.
How do you even begin to cultivate crops and build a society without those tools?
It would have been incredibly challenging, a constant struggle against the elements.
Okay, so back to those diseases.
Yeah. Diamond actually uses a really chilling story to introduce this topic.
Oh, really?
He talks about a doctor treating a patient with this mysterious illness.
Okay.
And it turns out this illness came from an animal,
Okay.
which leads him to explore how diseases can jump from animals to humans.
And this is where those domesticated animals come back into play, right?
Exactly. Because Eurasians had been living so closely with livestock for millennia,
Right.
they'd built up some immunity to these diseases.
But when they reached populations who had never been exposed,
Like a biological weapon.
wow, it's incredible how something as simple as domesticating an animal could have such far-reaching consequences.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of human history.
Totally. And you know what else is fascinating?
What's that?
The role of writing in all of this. Remember how Pizarro was able to conquer the Incas? Well, he actually had written accounts from earlier explorers.
Oh, yeah, which gave him valuable information about the Inca Empire.
Right. It's like he had a cheat sheet for conquest.
Exactly. And this highlights the power of writing
Right.
as a tool for storing and transmitting knowledge.
And building on that knowledge.
Right. It allows societies to accumulate information over generations, which fuels innovation and progress.
And Diamond talks about the evolution of writing from early cuneiform to the alphabet.
He does. And he argues that the spread of writing played a crucial role in the development of complex societies.
So we've got guns, germs, steel food production, and writing.
Those are some powerful forces.
And these are just some of the key factors that Diamond explores in his book.
Right.
It's starting to paint a clearer picture of how those historical patterns emerged.
It is. And we're just getting started.
I can't wait to see where this deep dive takes us next.
So, thinking about all these ultimate causes, these really big historical forces, it almost makes you wonder, do individual people even matter?
Okay, that's a great question. Like, are you saying great men don't matter?
Well, it's not so simple.
Yeah.
I think it's more nuanced than that.
Okay, so how do we reconcile these two ideas? Like, on the one hand, we've got these massive forces like geography and climate.
Right.
But then on the other hand, we've got individuals making choices.
Imagine a river.
Okay, a river.
Yeah, the river's course is shaped by the landscape, right?
Yeah.
The hills, the valleys, the rocks it flows through.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
But within that river, there are currents, eddies, even individual drops of water.
Right, each taking their own path.
Exactly. So the river represents those big historical patterns, those ultimate causes.
Okay, so empires rising and falling, technology spreading.
Right, all influenced by things like geography and resources.
But those individual people, like those drops of water, they still have their own agency.
They do. Think about a leader like Alexander the Great.
Okay.
He might have influenced the specific path of his empire, but the very existence of empires in that region was already made possible by those ultimate causes that Diamond talks about.
So it's like Diamond gives us the blueprint of a house, but individuals get to decorate the rooms, choose the furniture, add their own personal touches.
I like that analogy. But without that blueprint, there wouldn't be a house to begin with.
Exactly. So we're not saying that individuals are powerless,
Right.
but we're saying that they operate within these larger historical constraints.
And this helps us understand why a place like Australia, for example,
Right.
followed such a different path than, say, Eurasia.
It's not about the people themselves, but the hand they were dealt geographically speaking.
Precisely. Remember how we talked about Australia having those limited options for food production?
Right. They didn't have the same kinds of plants and animals that were easy to domesticate.
So they couldn't develop the dense populations and the complex societies that we see in other parts of the world.
But that doesn't mean they weren't innovative.
Not at all. They developed amazing adaptations to their environment, like fire stick farming.
Right. They would intentionally burn sections of the landscape.
Yeah, to clear out underbrush, make travel easier, and even encourage the growth of certain plants.
So it's like a carefully controlled form of land management.
It really is. And it shows their deep understanding of their environment.
That makes you wonder, what if they had had different resources to work with?
Right. Would they have developed agriculture independently?
It's a fascinating what if.
It really is.
Right.
And it brings us back to that central point. Geography isn't destiny, but it plays a huge role.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about New Guinea.
Okay.
We talked about the challenges they face, like the mountainous terrain and the dense rainforests.
Right.
Why couldn't they keep pace with Eurasia in terms of development? I mean, they had all those natural resources.
Well, one key factor was the availability of domesticable plants and animals.
Right, they had some decent crops, but nothing like the powerhouse grains of the Fertile Crescent.
And their only domesticated animal was the pig.
No horses, no cattle.
Nope. Which meant they lacked those advantages that those animals provided.
Not just for food, but for transportation fertilizer.
And disease immunity.
Right, so they were hit hard by those European diseases.
Exactly. And another challenge was that mountainous terrain.
Those mountains were like walls, right?
They really were isolating communities and making it hard for ideas and technologies to spread.
Compare that to Eurasia with its vast open steppes and interconnected river system.
It's like two different worlds shaped by the land itself.
It's almost like a giant natural experiment, seeing how different environments influence societies over thousands of years.
That's a great way to put it, and that's one of the things that makes Diamond's book so compelling.
Right.
He gives us this framework for understanding those vast historical patterns.
For seeing how geography, biology, even a bit of luck all work together.
Right.
Okay, so speaking of different trajectories, what about East Asia?
Oh yeah, they developed some of the world's most sophisticated civilizations early on.
So what were some of the factors that contributed to their success?
Well, they were lucky enough to be near the Fertile Crescent.
So they had early access to those domesticated plants and animals.
Exactly, which gave them a head start.
It's like they were in the right place at the right time.
It really is. And from there, they developed their own unique innovations.
Like what?
Well, they independently domesticated rice,
Okay.
which became a staple crop and could support huge populations.
And what about their writing system?
Oh, yeah, their writing system was super complex.
But it also helped create a strong sense of cultural unity.
It was like a universal code that transcended language barriers.
That's amazing. But if it was so effective, why didn't it spread as widely as alphabetic systems?
That's a great question. The complexity of the Chinese writing system was both a strength and a weakness.
Okay, how so?
Well, it fostered unity within China, but it made it difficult for other cultures to adopt.
It's like the difference between learning a whole new language versus just learning a new set of letters.
Exactly. Alphabets with their simpler structure were much easier to learn and adapt.
So they spread like wildfire.
They really did. And that's another example of how a seemingly small difference can have huge consequences over time.
It's incredible how all these factors, geography, domestication, writing systems,
Right.
all intertwine to influence the rise and spread of civilizations.
And we're just scratching the surface here. Diamond's book is comprehensive,
Right.
but it's just the beginning of exploring this vast tapestry of human history.
One of the things that blew my mind was the Austronesian expansion.
Oh, yeah. Talk about an epic journey.
It's one of the most remarkable migrations in human history.
And Diamond uses this multidisciplinary approach.
Right. He pulls from archaeology, linguistics, genetics
Even botany.
to tell this story of human movement and cultural diffusion.
It's like piecing together a giant puzzle.
So who are the Austronesians?
They were master navigators and explorers.
Okay.
They set sail from Taiwan around 3500 BC.
Wow.
And they ended up spreading across huge stretches of the Pacific Ocean.
And get this,
What?
they even reached Madagascar.
I know, right? That's off the coast of Africa.
How did they even get there?
They sailed westward across the Indian Ocean.
That's incredible. I mean, the skill and courage it must have taken.
And they weren't just wandering aimlessly.
Right.
They were skilled farmers and seafarers,
And they brought with them domesticated plants and animals.
like the pig.
So they were spreading their culture as they went?
Exactly. and their expansion had a profound impact on the regions they settled.
Sometimes they assimilated with existing populations,
Right.
and sometimes they displaced or even wiped out indigenous groups.
It's a reminder that human history isn't always a peaceful story of progress.
It's often a story of conflict and conquest.
And the Austronesian expansion is a perfect example of how those factors that Diamond highlights,
Right.
food production, technology, disease,
Right.
they all played out on a smaller scale.
Shaping the destinies of individual islands and communities,
It's like a microcosm of those larger patterns.
but with its own unique twists and turns.
Exactly. And one of the most fascinating aspects of their expansion
What's that?
is how it played out in New Guinea.
Okay.
Remember all those challenges we talked about?
The mountains, the dense rainforests.
Yeah, well, even with their amazing seafaring skills,
Right.
the Austronesians had a really hard time penetrating the interior of New Guinea.
So they met with resistance.
Oh yeah, big time.
Hmm.
The indigenous Papuan populations put up a fierce fight.
I mean, they were already adapted to that harsh environment.
Exactly. So the Austronesians couldn't just waltz in and take over.
There were centuries of conflict,
And cultural exchange.
and in the end, their influence was mainly limited to the coastal regions,
It's a testament to the resilience of the Papuan people.
their ability to hold their ground.
And it also highlights the importance of those environmental factors.
Right. Sometimes the environment just isn't conducive to certain types of growth.
Exactly. And that's a key takeaway from Diamond's work.
Okay.
He helps us understand why some societies flourished while others struggled,
It's not about inherent superiority or inferiority.
but about this complex interplay of environmental factors and historical circumstances.
It's a powerful message that challenges us to rethink our assumptions about human history and the roots of inequality.
It reminds us that the past isn't just a prologue.
Right.
It's a living force that continues to shape the world we live in today.
It's amazing to think about, that moment when those two worlds collided.
Yeah.
The old world and the new world.
That's like a clash of civilizations.
It really changed everything.
Absolutely a major turning point in history, and Diamond does a great job of showing just how different those two worlds were back then.
Right, like 1492.
Eurasia had this long history of agriculture, technology, state formation.
Right, all those things you've been talking about.
And the Americas, well, they were on a totally different path.
And then, of course, there were those devastating diseases.
Oh, yeah, we can't forget about the germs.
Smallpox, measles, influenza.
They were like invisible invaders.
And the indigenous populations had no immunity.
It's estimated that up to 95% of the indigenous population in the Americas died from European diseases.
95%? That's just mind-boggling.
It was a demographic catastrophe unlike anything seen before in human history.
It's hard to even grasp the scale of that loss.
Entire cultures, languages, ways of life wiped out
And it all happened so quickly.
in a matter of decades.
It really makes you think about those unintended consequences.
Right, it's something that happened thousands of years earlier in Eurasia. The domestication of animals
Right.
ended up having this devastating impact on a whole other continent.
It's like a butterfly effect on a global scale.
Exactly. And even beyond disease, there was a huge technological gap.
Right, by 1492, Eurasia had developed metalworking advanced shipbuilding gunpowder.
All sorts of innovations,
And that gave them a clear advantage.
both militarily and economically.
And again, a lot of that disparity stemmed from those geographical factors.
Eurasia's east-west axis allowed ideas and innovations to spread more easily.
Right, while the Americas, with their north-south axis and those mountains and deserts.
It was much harder to exchange knowledge.
Just like two different sets of rules.
It really is.
Yeah.
But Diamond is careful to point out that the European conquest of the Americas wasn't about inherent superiority.
Right.
It was this complex combination of factors.
Historical and environmental.
It's not about judging one civilization as better than another,
It's about understanding how these forces came into play.
and sadly often resulted in tragedy.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into guns, germs, and steel,
What a journey.
it really has been. It's amazing to consider the vastness and complexity of human history.
And Diamond gives us this incredible framework for understanding the patterns that have shaped our world.
Pulling from so many different disciplines.
It's a powerful reminder that the past isn't just something to be studied.
Right.
It's a living force that still influences us today.
So what can we learn from these historical patterns?
Yeah, how can we use this knowledge to create a better world?
Those are big questions.
They are. But guns, germs, and steel gives us a starting point.
A way to think about those questions.
And to understand the forces that have shaped our collective destiny.
It's been an incredible journey, and if you're interested in exploring these ideas further, I highly recommend checking out the book for yourself.
It's a must-read.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and remember, the journey of discovery never ends.
Keep exploring.
We'll see you next time.